much for coming here today and very welcome. We're looking forward to the webinar together with you again, and thank you, welcome for everyone joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here, and it's always nice to try and get a grip on these difficult subjects together with you. Now, what we're going to do here is to try and start taking stock of COVID-19 and its impact on the global supply chain. We're going to keep our focus a little bit of Asia, since after all, that is where we are. We're going to try and roll up from the beginning of the COVID-19 situation until today. And we're going to go out on a limb and do something very difficult that I don't recommend any one of you try at home. We're going to try and actually predict where the global supply chain is headed, where we might end up after COVID-19, if indeed there is such a thing as after COVID-19. What do you think, Stefan?
We have to be very optimistic here. There will be a world after.
Yeah, we have to believe in a post-COVID world, and that's one reason why we do this little seminar today. So we want to try and make this an interactive webinar today. So on a couple of occasions, we're going to try and ask all of you to give us feedback in the form of polls. I'm going to start off the whole day today with the first one. Now, I think all straddlers have joined, so we're going to officially close the room. We're going to start you off with the very first one. We're going to give you 30 seconds to answer 3 short questions about your preparedness at the beginning of COVID-19. So 30 seconds from now, and you should be seeing a poll come up on your screen. We're not seeing answers come in just yet. Yeah, okay, we are seeing some answers come in. Yes, please don't be shy. Don't be shy. I believe the first one might be multiple choice, but the others are binary. So you do have to pick one. You cannot be well prepared and not prepared at the same time. We're seeing questions. We're seeing replies come in. I'm going to give you 10 more seconds here.
See more coming in. That's good.
That's very good. Keep it up. Keep it up. And there. Now the results we're going to share with you right here. So the results interesting. For the first question here, looking at the beginning of 2020, how well prepared were you for an event like COVID-19? I would have probably expected something along those lines, only some preparations in place and no one clicking the button very well prepared.
I'm sure this was one of the things no one saw coming. It's no one has prepared for this. We can prepare for many things, but for sure this one was not on the site.
Of course, the polls are completely anonymous, so please don't worry about that. Those of you who are not prepared at all, you're in very good company. You would possibly with some people in this very room. I can't say for sure, but
I think that goes for us all.
Okay. As for the COVID-19 purchases and key partners in China, this is going to be our launching pad now into the next part of this conversation. The results are quite similar, and this will be a theme that we will be expanding on as we move on. So most of you have said some of them, both before and after, with a slight difference in how much business was done. How many of you clicked most of them before and most of them as of this situation? So we'll get into that in a minute. Now, I'm going to hand over to you here, Stefan, to give a little bit of a background on COVID-19 and how. Well, actually, I'll let you frame where you want to start, because I know you want to go back a little bit, just a little bit in time, to get the right overview.
Yeah, to give a little bit of framework for what we're going to talk about today, of course, the talk will be about how this has impacted the supply chain and how it's impacted the logistics. So give the background to it. I mean, we have seen China rise as a very important supply chain base, basically into the, what can we say, the global economy in 1978. Before that, it was not really participating in that level. In 2001, we entered the WTO, and after that, the economy was growing very fast and it's really participating in the global supply chain. In 2008, we had the financial crisis, and why we want to touch base on that now is because what happened then was we saw a lot of stimulus from the government coming into the economy with a lot of investments in infrastructure, a lot in the industrial sector, and a lot of working actually already then to pull away from labor-intense manufacturing and more into high-tech. All this investment has, of course, created a lot of oversupply capacity, if we want to call it. It also created a very, very efficient logistics sector. You have 7 of the biggest global container ports in the world are located in China. We saw basically starting a lot of the investment into the rail, the so-called Silk Road between China and Europe, as well started at that time with these investments. And then leading up to what we saw starting 2018 with the trade war that started to pull the development in the other direction with tariffs and other incentives pushing for reshoring and lesser globalization. And that is basically the framework for where we're standing today and how the COVID-19 has affected the supply chain we're sitting with today. So this has been the big trends. We saw that where we're standing now, after the initial shock that hit, it will start from China. Of course, as we said, we do this from an Asian perspective a little bit. We saw the first shock came here at the beginning of the year that really had a main impact, more like a shock effect into the supply chain, which we now see gradually coming back again. We see, of course, it coming back in different speeds, but most of it in China actually has coming back quite a lot in terms of capacity. We see a lot of e-commerce has risen even more than before, has been even more coming through during this time.
How much do you think, how big of a difference did it make that Asia had the experience from SARS and to an extent already protocols and methods in place since SARS and COVID-19?
I would like to think that it definitely has some experience that was tested at that time that now was used again. Of course, a major difference this time is that this has a much bigger scale. It is not just a supply issue, it's also a demand effect as well. So it pulls from 2 directions, which we didn't see at that time. When it started, of course, it started, as we know, in Wuhan and then spread out through the system. And actually, we saw, if we look at the logistics, it was actually quite, once the first shock come through, actually the system was quite resilient. The road transport was coming back fairly quickly. It took a few weeks because people were limited how people could transport and how drivers could transport. But once that was over, actually the movement of goods were starting coming back recently stable. For the air freight, there we saw a much bigger impact, no doubt about that, because the scenario has been for the international freight that almost half of the cargo is moved on passenger, in the belly of the passenger planes. And with people restricted to travel, that means a lot of the capacity disappeared from the market, even if the freighters and the goods still could travel, but the disappearance of the passenger flights made a major impact. So that was, I would say, the move that has made the biggest impact. The rail transportation, continued to be very resilient through the whole process. We now see bottlenecks, but that's coming mainly due to demand, high demand and high volumes.
Done here for a second, but let's push on.
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of it has been very resilient. And as we said before, the difference, I think, as you said before, you told a bit about SARS, and we take this one or the SARS or the Fukushima, I think the main difference has been that really it's affect both supply side and demand side. And also, it's really something that is mainly affected us humans. The physical supply chain, the factories, the railworks, the vessels, all that, and the capital connected to that is still intact and has fairly stable been back to operation. So all those investments are still there, operating, as soon as we're coming over the human shock. Yeah. If we look on the supply, now we don't talk about people, situation, or anything like that. We look on a purely supply chain side of this.
All right, we're going to try and get a sense from everyone on the call here how you're doing so far in the year of COVID and how it's actually affecting you right now. So for the second poll, I'm going to ask you again to answer 3 questions. I think we'll give them a minute this time. Are you okay with that, Stefan?
Yeah, very good. Of course, we will share it with you afterwards, so you will see what people.
It's going to be a minute. We're launching it now, and the questions will be your general business outlook for 2020, your general outlook for your business in and with China in 2020, and whether or not you've found new opportunities during the crisis. An easy yes and no question there to round it off.
Very interesting.
Please click your preferred answer and submit. There's 40 seconds left on the clock. I think we should add that we also have Dorothy here with us in the room to field questions that anyone might have. I can see the chat is being busy, but me and Stefan cannot say what you're saying. And I hope you're being nice to us and all, but you're talking to Dorothy here.
Yeah, please say hello to Dorothy as well.
I'm seeing some answers come in here, Stefan. Good, and we're going to close in 5 seconds. Last chance. A couple of people still haven't replied. And there we go. What do you think of these results, Stefan?
Yeah, actually, I'm looking forward really to see they coming through and see what's coming out. I think we all I think that some people here will definitely have some problems. Some people definitely also see some opportunities in this, which is, I think, quite interesting.
So this is the opportunity to jump to the last question there that you picked up on. Now that the poll's closed, 85% say they found new opportunities during the crisis. Now, I'd say maybe that was by necessity. Like, it is the only way maybe to deal with this crisis, and this is something I've heard a lot of our customers and our partners say, is that the only way to navigate the crisis was to try and identify the opportunities, identify business models or ways of doing business that you hadn't previously considered, and just try and go with it and try and make something out of that.
Yeah, well, I think we see the same. We have seen we have been ourselves, of course, working. We also seen a lot from several of our clients that has done a lot of really good new investments, a lot of good initiatives in this, how they find new business. Have you, for example, in your business, Björn, found anything new in this?
We've seen ourselves forced to invent services that didn't previously exist, that used to depend on where the clients used to depend on being able to travel themselves. It's just such a trivial matter as being able to get on a flight and go to China for sensitive visits, let's say, or involving key components new R&D, the kind of matter that you wouldn't naturally involve a third party in, but they now had to invent a way to do that with us in a way that safeguards intellectual property, the material itself, and so on. And so, again, I would say we've almost been forced to go in that direction. One other finding here that's interesting is that I don't see anyone who's picked the general outlook as awful. I think that's very positive.
Yeah, we have to say, I think it's the same for us. We see a lot of things that has been very good. I mean, again, we talk about supply chain. We don't talk about the human aspects of this. But of course, there are some things bad for the economy, but also we're seeing a lot of things that has been developing very good. As you said, you had new service that you was not in the market before that you have been able to introduce thanks to this. Yeah.
Correct. Let's move forward, Stefan.
As I said before, we have seen there are two major trends we have seen been working here at the moment. One is, of course, as we started with, that the big global supply chain with the globalization and specializing in efficiency has been the main driver of what we call it outsourcing, that scale of production where you specialize, you do something in a big scale, you become very, very efficient with that. That has been leading us to where we are today. And now we see lately the push for nearshoring coming from the trade wars, and it's coming from other things going on in the society as well. And that trend we see now getting some further push by the pandemic as well. And especially we saw it in the beginning when it started and when it was more of a isolated China, then we saw this was really hot topic. But we see it also change during this process, and we will come back to that a bit later. And the trend that was discussed also about moving production from China. We also know that a lot of this is actually Chinese companies themselves who move low-end production to low-cost areas. So it's not about just foreign companies. It's something that constantly evolves and updating. And of course, also had a lot of discussion the other year about what we call the China plus one strategy, where you not depend on just one country, but want to widen the base for your supply chain. So I think that is one trend that's been going for a while.
One thing I think has been made absolutely clear by the COVID-19 situation is that an over-dependence on China it's not just an administrative liability, but it's a genuine security risk for your supply chain. And even China plus one doesn't fix that issue depending on what the one is. So China plus one, if the one is a Chinese-owned factory in Vietnam relying on parts from China, you have not actually added any. You have not added anything to your supply chain, unless on paper, of course. Now, we're hearing some noise within our client base and the people we work with of moving production to Eastern Europe and to Mexico in the case of US manufacturers. Now, to some extent, on the US side, this was ongoing already before COVID-19 due to certain other ongoing political issues that I think we'll steer clear of today. Is that something you're seeing in your industry as well?
Yeah, we see it as well. But I think also, as we said, what we also see, and when things like this happen, also shows how interconnected, actually not just Asia or Vietnam, but actually the whole global supply chain, how interconnected they are. Because as we have seen this trend working this way, we also see the trend actually maintaining the global supply chain. And as we saw what's happened now, actually it was shown to be, after the first shock came through, it actually shown to be, I think, more resilient in many times than was expected. And it also showed how these countries are connected together. It's not just one country, it's a whole region. I mean, if we take, for example, if we like reading about the the mobile phone, you make an iPhone. I think they're having something like 43 countries and 6 continents in the supply chain to make these products. Or you're making e-bikes, that is usually involving something like 15 or 16 countries delivering products. So it is truly global for a lot of these products. And I think that's also what's shown here, that even if it's just one area, you will see that you still depend on many other regions, even if you're moving. Some clients have been very good to know the whole supply chain, not just one layer, but we also see some of them hasn't really dig down in the vendor's supply chain. And I think it's also about knowledge of your supply chain. If we make an easy thing, I mean, if you maybe not smell, but I mean, if you are an Android user, usually you know the Android network, you stay in that one, and it's a big step to go to an iPhone. I think it's a little bit the same also sometimes within your supply chain. You want to change. It's not just about changing a vendor, it's about a network of vendors that works together, and it's a cluster you're in getting knowledgeable in as well.
Is it fair to say then that that COVID-19 has not managed to dislodge China's central position in the global supply chain?
Not what we have seen so far. We see both. We have seen a lot of talks last year. Of course, it's a process still going and moving and looking for a new sourcing base. But we also see some trends where we saw last year some companies actually try to source outside China and now actually have to go back because China was actually proved to be more resilient than many other markets that they actually moved to, and now finding themselves go back, because as we saw, China and Korea and Taiwan was those started this and actually also coming out very early and proving in that sense to be very resilient. And also it's the supply chain now is not just about supplying, it's also about a market where you many times also producing and have your own market you're selling to as well. So it's not just black and white in terms of supply, it's also a bigger range of your business model for many companies.
I guess one sub point to that is that the companies we see faring better through the crisis were the ones that had a good structure of the supply chain within China and a number of suppliers, at least for key components, and who didn't have to, at the cusp of this crisis, then go out and source new suppliers and new partners to get that product to where it's, or that part to where it needed to be.
I think you're right. I think if you haven't done it before, I think during the process has been very hard, because then it's a moving target. Everyone, as this developed, it's been a little bit too late. Now I think many people go back and then they have to wait and see as we come to the other side.
We've seen a lot of purchase directors from Europe fight very valiant battles, some of whom I'm sure are on this call, and really hat off to especially European and American supply chain directors and purchase managers who fought their way through without prior preparation and without having structured the supply chain as to protect key components and materials.
I agree. I think we all see the same. So I think that's what we're seeing them go through, and as we said, it started to with the ones who started first coming into it. I think it's also the ones that we see coming first out of it as well as the scenario has developed. I think it's the fear in the beginning was bigger fear that the system wouldn't sustain. With that said, we still have problems. We're still seeing effects, and we still will see effects for a long time. But I think in many ways they've been proven after the first shock more resilient than we thought. And we see now transversing from what started as a supply problem to be a demand issue when this circle goes around. Because now we see the whole supply circle. We started with the raw material, some components producers that then seem manufactured to find when the final consumer doesn't buy, we see the circle also goes back. So there will be effects going back and forth for quite a while. Absolutely.
Where would you say that we are on that cycle right now? Like, are we heading towards the exit now? Is it still escalating? Is it still changing?
I think it will be regional. It will take time, but I still say we see things from the supply chain have recovered. I think now it's more of a demand question. How quick will the demand recover, and the general economy? So if we start, of course, with what we've been working with, there's a lot of the transportation. How has this impacted the transportation and logistics in this? It's a little bit the same. We saw a first instant shock coming through, which after a while actually proven to be quite resilient. Again, it's humans that were restricted for traveling, not goods. So in the beginning, if we start with the road transport, we saw a lot of restrictions for people's movement, meaning that the trucks and road transportation was limited because the drivers couldn't pass through borders. But as that came through and come back, it actually came back quite quickly. And I would say, if we look on Europe, Asia, and USA, we are basically up on our working procedure where the transportation cover the needs. We have seen some change in pricing and so on through the way, but I would say it's basically back and working now. If we look for the rail transportation from Asia to Europe, that has been very robust through the whole way and didn't have any big lits. We see some congestions now, but that actually coming from the increase in demand and the very high volumes coming through the system, not a system problem itself. It's driven by the extra volumes coming through.
Can I ask you the $1 million question here? Can I now afford to start shipping goods by plane out of China again?
For the plane, I would say it's the mode of transport has had the biggest impact. If we look where we're standing today, because a lot of the products on plane goes in the passenger flights, and they are not flying because we are not allowed to travel as we were before. So the freighters are operating, but a lot of the passenger, that means a lot of capacity. So we are, I would say, we still are lacking half of the capacity, and the prices are, of course, considerably higher than we were a year ago. We are coming down from the very peak we saw here in last months and the months before, when it was a lot of urgency for PPE. So it's come down, but we're still higher than we should be normal on this time of the year.
We've seen a demand for a logistics service in between air and sea that we've actually never seen before. So we help a lot of clients who purchase in China with the destination of goods in Europe. And it's historically only been the two major options of sea or air, but rail has really come up as the go-to alternative for us, with price somewhere in between, freight times also somewhere in between. Do you think that this crisis has maybe helped bring rail transport from China into the mainstream?
I think it's definitely what can we say, opened the eyes for a lot of users who, as you say, traditionally have been using either ocean freight, where you move in bulk and you need a cost-effective solution, or you move by air freight when you are very urgent. And a lot of them hasn't looked on the rail as an option. But I think now many ones, because it was resilient option, it had made many companies look into this and now found, yeah, this suits us well, especially now when we still have on the air freight still is a high cost and still lacking capacity. The ocean freight, we still have a lot of blank sailings, even if you still cover up the demand. I would say price-wise, we are around 20% over last year. So it's some more costly, but not the huge increase. So it hasn't had that big effect as we've seen on the air freight. But I also would say, I think now, if we're looking forward for the rest of the year, I think the Q2 has been, what can we say, the low market level in terms of disturbance and in terms of disturbance to the transportation and in activity. I think the activity will continue to increase, and especially looking into Q3, I think we will see more increase in the system as well.
I'd like to think so.
So I think also, as we said before, how people acted for this. I think we have learned some lessons. We have learned some lessons. Simple things. How can we work remotely? And I think also many companies found that nowadays in the global world, supply chain management is not just a support function to the rest of the company. It's coming out as a very vital function to a lot of companies because it's so put together very much. It's so global. So it's just as important for many companies as the sales or the R&D functions within the companies. That's I think what many lessons coming out from this.
This has been one of our key lessons, probably, that supply chain really is it's a matter demanding C-level attention, and it needs to have a perspective of resilience built into it. When you're in normal times and not in a time of crisis, it's very easy to push supply chain off to an administrative unit that deals with pricing and delivery times and maybe retain some contracts in a drawer. And the kind of day-to-day management of the purchase process, right, which is really clerical. But there is an element of risk to your supply chain as a whole built in there. And I really think one of the positive effects of COVID-19 will be that this is now visible to everyone involved in the supply chain process. That the element of resilience and the element of risk and security needs to have a place at the table when you look at the global supply chain.
I agree with you, and I think it's highlight that, and because it shows how vital it is to know your supply chain, not just on level one, but also who is your crucial vendors, but also who is the crucial vendors of your vendor. So if you take your 5 top ones, what is their
correct?
How are they sticking together? Are they sourcing it from? So even if you move, as you said before, you move it from one area to another one, where are they getting their key components from?
Correct. Yes, and even logistically, like to ask the question on supplier and sub-supplier level. How does the components get delivered to where they need to be assembled correctly? This is something that we saw in the weeks right after China started lifting restrictions internally, that the main manufacturing hubs could not get the key materials.
Yeah.
And a lot of supply chain managers in the West just didn't know where the key materials were from.
Well, I think we saw the same when we were early of the year. We had a lot of factories we talked to that maybe their factories was not closed. They had all the staff there, the factory was there, but they're missing 1 or 2, as you say, key components. So they still couldn't run the production because something was missing, even if they had full staff, they had all the other things. So I think that's a lesson to look into it, and maybe to identify, do you have any critical components you need to have some extra stock?
Yep.
Maybe you don't need to have all stock. What are the critical ones to look into?
We found that at the very least, the companies who had at the very least given serious consideration to what a crisis might look like. And mostly, the most scenarios that we saw were natural disasters, political conflict, that sort of scenarios. It didn't matter much what type of scenario had been imagined in these exercises. Just the fact that you had considered a major scenario with big impact on the region as a whole. They had forced themselves to ask these questions in advance. And I think those groups that had taken the time and the effort came out of this very well.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think it's shown the ones who had put this question, not because no one could maybe know this was coming, but the ones who had worked with these issues before, yes, of course, had a head start when it happened. Absolutely.
So somewhere in here, I would also say that it's becoming clear that the function of supply chain director on a global level, that job really has to include thinking and planning ahead for things that you can't actually know when they're going to happen and how they will impact you.
Yeah.
But you can work, there's multiple ways of how you can work with scenarios and to try and build in resilience. And it's certainly worth the effort, and it's certainly worth trying to get a plan down on paper that you can pull out when an event such as this hits.
I think it also shows the importance of data and working with to visualize your supply chain on a deeper level, working with your suppliers, working with your transportation. Where are the things? Where are they in process? Is it any delays in the system? And to get hold of historical data to be able to make some kind of a forecast.
Yes.
And also to, of course, to forecast your clients. Normally, what is their buying patterns of your clients? Not just, we all know what happens. If it's a crisis, all clients will come back and say, buy twice. But, but to have an idea of what is the forecast.
So we're going to move towards the last section of our little talk today. So we're going to do our poll number 3. And now that you've heard me and Stefan try to imagine some of the effects that this might be having, I'm going to actually ask you to implicate yourself and to do the same. So in poll 3, I hope we haven't been sharing that the whole time, but if we have, just please ignore that, and we're going to launch the poll number 3. I'm going to ask you some questions about what you think moving forward about the COVID-19. So 1 minute as usual. Please go ahead and vote as quickly as you can. Don't be shy. There we go. I see some answers come in there. Now, one result that's becoming clear immediately here, just at a glance, is our audience seem to think the COVID crisis is a long-term matter.
Yeah, I think maybe most of our thinking around 3 years.
I'm going to leave the poll open for another 10 seconds, so please hurry up. Another finding here immediately is to question 3. To what extent has COVID changed your approach to supply chain? Not a single soul so far has clicked no changes. Right? So
everyone has found out that there are some changes, but it also seems like it's not so many that says it's changed everything. So I think also many has preparation to quite good extent as well.
We're sharing the results now with everyone for you to have a look as well. I think the results speak for themselves, at least on question 1. The majority here believes that the crisis, that the COVID crisis, I framed it, will end within a 3-year period. A few has picked within 2020. I really like an optimist, and I'd like to think that the worst might be over within 2020.
I would definitely like to think so, yeah. I'm not a doctor, but I want to think so now, I'm guessing.
From a business perspective, has COVID meant more risk or more opportunities? That was a bit of a trick question for me there, and they're on to me. Most people have clicked equal amount of risk and opportunity. I don't think I should have given them that option, Stefan.
No, but it seems to be optimistic. But I mean, if we, yeah.
What do you think? More risk or more opportunity?
I think it is. If we look for ourselves in this way, I think it is a lot of opportunities because it highlights how important the supply chain are. And if we're working in supply chain, it just shows how important it is we find solutions, how we make it stronger, how we make it more visible, how we can work more with visibility tools and with digitalization to make it more visible, to see what are we providing to our clients, and for them to forecast their needs of transportation as well, and how it is in the seasons. So for us, I think it's a lot of challenges, a lot of opportunities.
11% of our participants, and this is the last thing I'll pick up on here, 11% has picked the option to question 3. To what extent has COVID changed your approach to supply chain? 11% said it's changed everything. And that's an interesting answer. And I really wish we could, we were in a live audience. We could get some people up here on stage.
Yeah. We will hope in this chat someone will come and share with us later. We'll have opportunity in the Q&A.
But I'm really hoping that those are the same people who's also said it's meant more opportunities than risk.
Yeah.
And I'd really like to think so. And then I think for the people who are still with us here and still actively engaging with the topic, I'd like to think it's the opportune, the people that see the new chances here.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with that. I want to agree with you.